The grand hall of Valara's crystal palace gleamed under the light of twin moons, their glow refracted through towering windows of violet glass. Human ambassador Cale Draven stood on the inlaid obsidian floor, his gaze meeting the queen's, for the first time. She was more than the tales had said, taller than most humans, with skin like moonlight's reflection on silver water, her eyes deep and knowing. Around them, the court murmured, sensing tension between two worlds on the brink of alliance. Yet in that first look, there was something unspoken, recognition, curiosity, perhaps even the dangerous seed of longing. Kyle reminded himself why he was here, not to admire beauty, but to secure peace. The Valaran court had demanded an alliance on their terms, expecting Cale to yield. But when Queen Serenia rose from her throne and stepped forward, dismissing her, advisors with a subtle wave, Cale felt the air shift. Her voice was low and melodic, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Ambassador," she said, "your people are strong, but strength alone will not save you." She circled him as though reading the truth from his posture, the weight of every word brushing against his resolve. "You must understand, this alliance is not just politics, it is survival." The closeness of her presence felt both disarming and electric. Later, in the private chamber of negotiations, Serenia dismissed the guards. She moved to a table between them, spreading star charts that detailed invasion routes of the Sithari horde. Her fingertip traced the lines slowly, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of something personal. "If we do nothing together, both our worlds will burn," she said. Cale leaned forward, sensing the vulnerability behind her controlled demeanor. She was not a ruler seeking dominance. She was a leader trying to save her people, no matter the cost. And for reasons he couldn't name, he already wanted to help her win. As the night deepened, strategy bled into something else. They spoke of victories and losses, of the burdens of command and the loneliness of leadership. Cale noticed the way her eyes softened when she spoke of her home before the wars. Gardens now turned to ash, rivers she had not walked beside in decades. He told her of his family's farm on Earth, of the orchard trees and the laughter that had vanished when the war began. Somewhere in the sharing of pain, the boundaries between them blurred. The moment their fingers brushed over the same star chart, Cale realized his mission had already changed. When Cale left the chamber, the palace, corridors seemed longer, the air heavier with a strange promise. The queen's words followed him, echoes of alliance mixed with something else entirely. He had been trained to negotiate treaties, not hearts. Yet Serenia's presence lingered like the aftertaste of rare wine, dangerous, unforgettable. He had not just been speaking to a ruler. He had been speaking to a woman whose burdens mirrored his own, and though he would not admit it aloud, he already feared what that meant for the choices he would have to make. The days that followed were filled with tense diplomatic sessions by day and whispered strategy meetings by night. Officially, they spoke of troop movements and supply lines, yet their conversations often strayed to memories of simpler times. The queen's laughter, rare and unguarded, had a way of silencing Kyle's cynicism. Once, during a heated council debate, her gaze met him across the chamber, not as sovereign to ambassador, but as a silent co-conspirator in something greater than politics. The warmth of that look stayed with him long after. Valara's capital. City was a jewel of architecture, its crystalline spires catching the sunlight in dazzling arcs. Cale found himself walking the palace gardens with Serenia, under the guise of discussing terrain advantages for their defense. She pointed out flowers that bloomed only once a decade, their petals fragile yet defiant against the wind. "They survive," she said softly, "because they bend when the storms come, not because they resist." Kyle wondered if she was speaking of the flowers or of herself. The scent of the blossoms and the quiet weight of her nearness worked. on him in ways no battlefield ever had. In the War Council chambers, some of her advisors grew suspicious. They whispered that she was too willing to listen to a human, that her judgment might be clouded. Serenya's responses were sharp, but Kyle could see the toll it took on her. In private, she admitted the strain. "They want me to be untouchable," she said, "but I am not made of stone." Her eyes held his a beat too long, and Kale understood that she meant more than just the politics. In that instant, the urge to protect her was no longer a matter of treaty, it was personal. One evening, while reviewing intelligence reports in her private study, a tremor rocked the palace. Sithari infiltrators had breached the outer defenses. Kale and Serenya moved as one, slipping through hidden passages toward the command center. Along the way, in a dim corridor lit only by the glow of emergency lights, they paused. Too close, adrenaline rushing. "Stay behind me," Kale murmured. She gave a faint, defiant smile. "I don't hide behind anyone." The words were a challenge, but the look they shared carried something deeper. An acknowledgement of the trust they had already placed in one another. After the attack was repelled, they stood on a balcony overlooking the smoking skyline. The city had survived, for now. Serenya's hair was loose, silver strands dancing in the wind, her gown torn at the hem. "You fought like one of my own," she said quietly. Kyle's response was equally soft. "Maybe I am." They stood in silence, two rulers of different worlds, bound not by law or blood, but by the first threads of a connection that neither of them had expected, and neither could afford to ignore. Kale began to see the weight of the crown in the smallest details, the way Serenya's shoulders squared before entering a council chamber, the measured pauses in her speech when she needed to project control. Yet in the rare hours they stole away, those masks fell away. They would sit in the quieter palace halls, away from the watching eyes, sharing fragments of themselves. He told her of his brother lost in the war. She spoke of a childhood friend who had vanished during the first Sithari raid. These confessions were not strategy. They were lifelines in a storm neither could weather alone. One night, after a long day of war planning, Serenya invited Kale to the Royal Observatory. From its domed glass ceiling, the stars seemed close enough to touch. She stood beside him, pointing out constellations he did not know, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "When I was a girl, I used to think the stars were windows into other worlds," she said. "Now I know they're just far away." Kale glanced at her profile in the starlight and thought that perhaps some distances could be crossed, not with ships, but with trust. But trust came at a cost. The enemy's spies grew bolder, and assassination attempts became frequent. After one near miss in the throne room, Kale insisted on guarding her personally, an unusual breach of protocol. At first, she resisted, but when their eyes met in the quiet aftermath, she relented. "Very well," she said. "If you must shadow me, do so as an equal, not a servant." The word equal carried a resonance that echoed long after, as though it unlocked a truth neither dared speak. The alliance treaty was nearing completion, but its terms required concessions from both sides. The Human Council demanded certain privileges that would weaken Valara's sovereignty. In a tense late-night session, Kale argued against his own people's demands, risking his standing. Serenya watched him, her expression unreadable until the others left. Then, quietly, she said, "You fought for my world tonight, not yours." There was no question in her voice, only certainty. That night he found himself in her private chambers again, but not for maps or strategies. They stood close, speaking in whispers that had nothing to do with war. The barriers between them, diplomatic, cultural, personal, had eroded to a point of no return. And though the war raged on beyond the palace walls, Kyle knew the greatest battle he faced now was not against the enemy fleets, but against the inevitability of what they had become to each other. The War Council reconvened under a shroud of urgency. Reports from the front were dire. 3 Valaran border colonies had fallen overnight. The Queen's commanders urged immediate retaliation, but Serenya's eyes found Kyle's across the table, seeking his counsel. He spoke with quiet conviction, urging restraint, a defensive maneuver that would protect their civilians while buying time for reinforcements. Her advisors bristled, but Serenya raised a hand to silence them. "We will not throw lives away, for the sake of pride," she declared. In that moment, Kale realized she wasn't just hearing him, she was trusting him above her own counsel. That kind of faith was dangerous, especially in war. Outside the council chambers, the murmurs grew louder. Some claimed the human ambassador had ensnared their queen's heart, compromising her judgment. Serenya brushed off such accusations in public, but Kale could see the toll it took in the set of her jaw, the rare flash of uncertainty in her gaze. One evening, he found her alone in the War Garden, a place where Valaran rulers traditionally sought clarity before great decisions. The moonlight pooled over her armor, gleaming like liquid silver. "Does your world think me weak?" she asked, without looking at him. Kyle shook his head slowly. "No. My world would fear a leader who can't feel." The next day, enemy fleets, massed near the Ionis Rift, a critical corridor for supply lines. Serenya and Kale stood on the bridge of the royal flagship, their voices low amid the chaos of battle preparations. She laid out her plan, a calculated retreat, luring the Sithari into a trap near Valara's moons. Kale, scanning the star maps, saw the brilliance of it, and the risk. If it failed, both their forces would be decimated. "I'll take command of the diversion wing," he offered without hesitation. Her eyes flickered with a mix of pride and fear. "If you do, you may not come back," he only replied. "Neither will you, if I don't." The trap worked, but barely. The Sithari fleet was broken, yet Valara's own ships limped back to port. In the aftermath, Serenya visited Kale in the medbay, where he lay with a bandaged shoulder and a thin smile. "You disobeyed my retreat order," she said, standing at his bedside. "And you ignored my request to stay safe," he countered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension between them, neither anger nor relief, but something far more complicated. When she finally sat beside him, her hand resting lightly over his, Kyle felt the lines between duty and desire blur beyond repair. That night, the palace was quiet except for the distant hum of the wounded city. Kyle stood on the balcony of his assigned quarters, staring at the twin moons. He didn't hear her approach until her shadow fell across the floor. Serenya joined him in silence, the cool night air tugging at her hair. Without preamble, she said, "Every choice I make pulls me farther from the throne I swore to protect." Kale turned to face her, his voice steady. "Then maybe the throne isn't the only thing worth protecting." Her gaze searched his face, for the truth behind those words, and when she found it, she didn't look away. Weeks passed, and the alliance deepened, not just between their armies, but between the two of them. Yet the closer they became, the more perilous their position grew. Serenya's political enemies within her own court began moving against her, accusing her of compromising Valara's sovereignty for personal attachment. Kyle overheard whispers of plots to replace her with a more compliant figurehead. He told her of the danger, but she dismissed it with an almost weary calm. "I have fought the Sithari for decades," she said. "I will not be undone by cowards in my own halls." Still, Kyle saw the shadow of doubt behind her defiance. Their bond became both their strength and their vulnerability. In the command center, their exchanges were crisp and professional. But in the quiet between crises, their conversations carried unspoken confessions. One night, after hours of planning a counteroffensive, Serenia leaned back in her chair and asked softly, "If this ends in victory, where will you go?" The question caught Cale off guard. He had no home to return to, no family waiting. "Maybe I'd stay," he said. Her lips curved into a small smile, but her eyes betrayed the fear of what that choice would cost both of them. When the Scythery launched a surprise assault on Valara's capital, Cale and Serenia fought side by side in the streets, rallying both human and alien soldiers in a desperate defense. Amid the smoke and chaos, Cale saw her nearly fall to a sniper's shot. Without thinking, he hurled himself into the line of fire, taking the impact on his armor. The moment they found cover, she gripped his shoulders, her voice breaking. "You fool, your life isn't mine to risk." He managed a breathless grin. "Maybe it is." For the first time, she didn't argue. After the battle, Valara stood, but the city bore deep scars. That night, Serenia called Cale to the royal garden, where lanterns flickered among the damaged blooms. She spoke not of war, but of her people's legends. Stories where love and duty could never coexist without one consuming the other. "Do you believe that?" she asked. Cale's reply was quiet but unwavering. "I believe that sometimes choosing one doesn't mean losing the other." She held his gaze, and in that moment, the unspoken truth between them felt heavier than the weight of any crown. Yet the storm was far from over. Intelligence reports revealed that the Scythery had planted agents within Valara's court, fueling dissent. Serenia faced a choice: root them out publicly and risk civil unrest, or move in secret and risk losing the trust of her own people. She turned to Cale, not as a ruler to an advisor, but as a woman to the one person she trusted completely. "If I make the wrong choice," she said, "I lose everything." Cale stepped closer, his voice low. "Then we make it together." The promise hung between them, fragile yet unbreakable. The operation to expose the traitors began under the guise of diplomatic preparations for a human delegation's visit. Cale played the part of dutiful ambassador, while Serenia worked behind the scenes to uncover the conspiracy. Every day they moved like actors in a dangerous play, smiles in public, whispers in the shadows. The tension between them was a constant undercurrent, sharpened by the knowledge that one mistake could cost not just their lives, but their worlds. Late one night, in the quiet of her strategy chamber, Serenia admitted, "If this fails, they'll use my connection to you as proof of betrayal." Cale's answer was simple. "Then let them see." The trap was set during a royal banquet, the perfect stage for unveiling the conspirators. Serenia played her role flawlessly, toasting to unity while subtly signaling her guards. When the traitors moved, they were intercepted in a swift, decisive strike. The hall erupted in chaos, but Serenia remained composed, her gaze locking with Cale's across the crowd. In that look was the acknowledgement of shared victory, and the knowledge that their partnership had just become far more dangerous in the eyes of her court. After the banquet, she found Cale waiting in the same garden where they had first spoken, alone. The air was cool, scented faintly with night-blooming flowers. "We bought ourselves time," she said. Cale stepped closer. "And maybe trust." Her expression softened, but there was sadness in her voice. "Time is all we have, and it's never enough." He wanted to tell her that it could be, if she chose differently, but the weight of her crown was still between them. The Scythery retaliated swiftly, launching a series of planetary bombardments on Valara's agricultural worlds. Resources dwindled, morale frayed. Serenia threw herself into the defense, but Cale saw the toll it took. In one rare moment of exhaustion, she allowed herself to lean against him, armor cold against his uniform. "Sometimes I wonder if the stars will even remember us," she murmured. Cale wrapped an arm around her, his voice steady. "They will, if we make them." In the days that followed, their strategies became sharper, their decisions bolder. Together, they orchestrated a supply run through enemy-controlled space, securing food and medicine for both Valarans and humans. It was a small victory, but it reminded their people that unity could win battles. For Kael and Serenia, it was another step toward proving that love and leadership could coexist, even if the galaxy refused to believe it. The alliance was stronger than ever, but so were the forces arrayed against it. Serenia's court remained divided. Human politicians questioned Kael's loyalty, and the Sithari tightened their grip on the outer systems. In the midst of this pressure, a diplomatic summit was arranged, a chance to solidify the alliance publicly. But both knew it was also a trap, a stage where enemies could strike under the guise of peace. On the eve of their departure, Serenia visited Kael's quarters. "If something happens tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know." He stopped her with a look. "Nothing will happen to you. Not while I'm here." The summit began under the watchful eyes of dozens of delegations. Serenia and Kael played their roles perfectly, their movements synchronized, their words measured. Yet beneath the calm exterior, both were scanning for signs of danger. The attack came during the final toast, a sudden explosion, followed by armed Sithari infiltrators storming the hall. Without hesitation, Kael pulled Serenia to cover, drawing his weapon. She fought beside him, their movements as seamless as if they had trained together for years. The battle was quick but brutal, ending with the attackers captured and the summit in ruins. In the aftermath, the surviving delegates hailed their survival as proof of the alliance's strength. But Serenia knew the truth. It was only a temporary reprieve. That night, in the quiet of her private chambers, she and Kael stood by the window overlooking the wounded city. "They'll keep coming," she said, "until one of us falls." Kael took her hand, his grip firm. "Then we stand together, until the end." The words felt like a vow, heavier than any treaty. As the weeks passed, the war entered a new phase. Serenia and Kael led joint missions, their trust in each other an unspoken weapon. In the field, they moved as one, their commands complementing each other with precision. But in the rare quiet moments between missions, the weight of their connection pressed in. Every shared glance, every brush of hands carried the knowledge that their time was finite. They could win the war and still lose each other to politics, to duty, to the cold demands of a galaxy that feared love more than death. And yet, neither of them turned away. On the eve of their final campaign, they stood in the Royal Observatory once more, the stars stretching endlessly before them. Serenia reached for his hand, her voice steady despite the storm ahead. "If I must choose," she said, "I already have." Kael's answer was simple, certain. "Then so have I." The war awaited, but in that moment they were not queen. And ambassador, not Valaran and human, they were two souls who had decided, against every warning, that love was worth the empire it might cost. The final campaign began at dawn. The Velaran fleet and human task forces assembling in formation above the crimson clouds of Dravanis Prime. Intelligence reported that the Sithari had concentrated their war command here, making it the perfect target for a strike that could end the conflict. Serenia stood on the flagship's command deck, her presence a quiet anchor amid the storm of preparations. Kael joined her, scanning the tactical displays. "Once we start," he said, "there's no going back." She glanced at him, the weight of her choice already made. "I've been past the point of no return for some time now." Outside the viewport, the first flashes of weapons fire lit the darkness. As the fleets clashed, Kael led the ground assault team toward the enemy's planetary stronghold. The fighting was brutal, the air thick with smoke and the scream of ion cannons. He pushed forward, knowing Serenia's own squad was moving to cut off the Sithari leadership from escape. Over the comms, Her voice came through steady, issuing orders and rallying her soldiers. Then the line crackled with static, replaced by shouts and the sound of weapons fire. Kyle's stomach tightened. Her position had been compromised. He broke from his route, cutting through enemy lines with single-minded determination. He found her pinned in the ruins of a shattered spire, surrounded by Sithari elites. The sight of her, armor scorched, eyes fierce, struck something deeper than fear. Without hesitation, Kale dove into the fight, his movements fueled by a raw urgency that ignored the odds. Together, they cut through their attackers, but not without cost. A blast caught Serenia across the shoulder, knocking her to one knee. Kale hauled her up, ignoring the pain in his own side. "You're not falling here," he told her, and she gave him the smallest, fiercest smile he had ever seen. With the stronghold breached, the Valaran human forces surged forward. Serenia and Kyle made it to the central command chamber, where the Sithari warlord awaited. The battle that followed was short, violent, and final. When the warlord fell, the remaining enemy forces began to retreat, the war's tide turning in a single heartbeat. But the victory came at a cost. Dozens of allied ships destroyed, thousands lost. The weight of those sacrifices pressed on them, both as they watched the enemy banners fall. This was what they had fought for, yet neither of them felt triumph. Only the quiet knowledge that the war was over, at least for now. That night, in the stillness after the storm, they stood together in the war garden. Lantern light flickered across the shattered stone paths and damaged blooms, a reminder that even beauty bore scars. Serenia turned to him, her voice low. "They'll expect me to rebuild the Empire stronger than before. They'll expect me to be the queen they wanted, not the woman I've become." Kale's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "And what do you expect of yourself?" She hesitated, then answered with the truth she had carried silently for months. "To be with you, no matter what it costs." In the weeks that followed, peace talks began between Valara, humanity, and the scattered remnants of the Sithari. Serenia played her part as queen flawlessly, attending councils, signing accords, projecting the strength her people demanded. Yet every spare moment she found was spent with Kale. Quiet walks through the palace gardens, late-night conversations, over star maps, moments of laughter that felt stolen from a different life. The bond between them was no longer just a rumor whispered in shadow. It was a truth that needed no words. But the closer they grew, the more they both sensed the looming reckoning. Opposition to their alliance mounted within Valara's High Council. Old guard nobles feared human influence, while some military leaders saw Kale as a liability. The council began to pressure Serenia to distance herself from him publicly, framing it as a political necessity. When she refused, they escalated, threatening to block vital reconstruction efforts unless she reconsidered her personal entanglements. Kyle urged her to think strategically, to let him step away for the sake of her people. She looked at him as though he'd suggested cutting out her own heart. "If they force me to choose," she said, "they will not like my answer." But the council did force it. During a formal assembly, they presented Serenia with an ultimatum: renounce her relationship with the human ambassador or abdicate her throne. Gasps rippled through the chamber as the words hung in the air. Kyle, standing at the edge of the dais, felt every eye turned toward him. Serenia's silence stretched into a heavy pause. Then, with the clarity of someone who had already made her choice, she removed the silver coronet from her brow and placed it on the council table. "My people deserve a ruler who will give them everything," she said. "I will give my heart, where it belongs." The chamber erupted, some in outrage, others in stunned silence. Kale stepped forward, unsure if this was bravery or madness. Serenia walked to him without hesitation, taking his hand in front of the entire council. I chose love over my empire, she said softly but loud enough for all to hear. And I do not regret it. In that moment, she was no longer the queen of Valara. She was Serenia, the woman who had fought a war, defied her court, and still dared to love without apology. Chaol, for his part, simply tightened his grip on her hand and vowed silently never to let go. They left the palace together that day, walking through the streets as both allies and strangers greeted them. Some bowed in respect, others turned away in disapproval, but Serenia seemed lighter than Chaol had ever seen her. The war was over, the empire no longer hers, and yet for the first time, she was free. That night, under the twin moons, they stood on the balcony of a modest home far from the palace. Serenia leaned into him, her voice a whisper. The stars may never remember the queen I was, but they will remember us. Kyle smiled, certain she was right.